So today's Daf Yomi is the Daf Yomi for Tisha B'Av, but we're recording it the day before Tisha B'Av because we're not allowed to study Torah on Tisha B'Av. It's Reinu, to our great distress. But we pray for the time when we can, again, study Torah and do the Daf Yomi on Tisha B'Av. So we're at the Mishnah on 72a. The Mishnah says, Zeg Gittin72 imeti. Somebody says, a husband says to his wife, this is your get. If I will die, Zeg Gittin72 michol, this is your get. If I will die from this illness. Or Zeg Gittin72 achar misa, this is your get after death. It's not going to be, it's as though he said nothing, and it's not going to be considered a get. And Rashi says the reason is because the implication of his words are, when I die, you will be divorced. But we know that there's a concept, Rashi says, that you can't divorce somebody after you die. Ein get la'achar misa. There's no divorce after you die, and so therefore it's not going to be valid. The Gemara then says, the Mishnah then says, Mehayom Mesi, if you're divorced from today, if I die, Me'achshav Mesi, from now, if I die, Me'ayom Mesi, Me'achshav Mesi, Harei Zeget, then it will be a divorce. Then under those circumstances, it will be a divorce. But let's say it says, Harei Zeget Me'ayom, because the implication of that is that you're being divorced immediately from today. Let's say he says, Harei Zeget Mehayom u'achar misa. Let's say he says, you'll be divorced from today and after death. So therefore, both things are going to be included in that phrase. So therefore we say get ve'eno get. It's a divorce and it's not a divorce. We're not sure what he's saying. Rashi says, Misafkele, we're not sure. Itana havi me'ayom im amos. If it's a condition, a stipulation that you'll be divorced from today if I die, and so therefore, since he dies, the stipulation has been fulfilled, and therefore it's going to be a get from the time of the giving. Or do we say that he changed his mind? And he changed his mind when he said from today, and then he said, oh, actually after death. And so therefore, it says though he said you'll be divorced after death. And then it says though he said nothing. Because by a stipulation, we could say that she's divorced from today. But here we can't. But if it's not a stipulation, then we're going to say that he's trying to say she's divorced after death, and that's not valid. So the Gemara is going to discuss this case in more detail. So in that case, we're not sure, so it's a doubt. And so therefore, she does chalitza, meaning to say if her husband dies and she falls to her husband's brother for yibum, we don't do yibum, but we still require chalitza out of stringency, because maybe it's not a get. So, but she can't do yibum because we're concerned that maybe it was a get, and then she's not allowed to marry her ex-husband's brother. That's he says, this is your divorce from today. If I die from this illness, the Amad Bashuk, and then he got up and he walked in the marketplace, the Chala, and then he got sick, Umeis, and then he died, so then we have to evaluate if he died as a result of the first illness, it's a get, otherwise it's not a get. So we see from here, Alma, in Macy, that we see from here that if he says, if I die, it says, though he's saying, Kala achar misa dami. And he says, if I die, it says, though he's saying, I'm giving you the get after death. But then, but he says that you're divorced from today if I die. But then he comes back and says, from today if I die, or from now if I die, that it seems to be that's the opposite. Harei Zeget, and that is a get, because that's being divorced from today. Alma and Macy, so we see from here that when he says if I die, it's la ko achar misi dami. And it means to say if I die, it doesn't mean like it's after death, because in the latter it's a valid get. So Amar Abaye, so Abaye says, if I die implies two possible expressions. Mashma kameach shav, mashma koachar misa. It implies both from now you're divorced, and also implies after death. Amar la, so it depends what he says with it. If he says to her, me'ayom, you're divorced from, if I die, you're divorced from today, then command Amar la me'ach shav dami. Then it says, though he's saying you're divorced from now. But if he didn't say from today, then command Amar la achar misa dami. Then it's so as though he said to her, you're divorced after death. So it all depends on the context. So now the Mishnah had said, this is your get. If I die, lo amar klum. She doesn't do anything. That means say, this is your get. If I die, she's not divorced. And then if her husband died, she would fall to Yibam. But Rav Huna says, no, she doesn't fall to Yibam, choletes. She has to do the chalitza. She can't marry her husband's brother. She has to go through the process of divorce in such circumstance, which is called chalitza, choletes. Gemara says, but why? But didn't our Mishnah say, didn't our Mishnah say it's as though you said nothing? So why does she have to do the chalitza? Why can't she do Yibam? Gemara says, lo amar kum da asira la'alma. No, so what it means when it says lo amar kum, it means that she's still going to be prohibited to everybody else, but she's prohibited to the Yavam. Meaning to say we're going to apply to her the stringencies of both. We're going to say that she's prohibited to marry anybody else until she gets the chalitza, but she also can't do Yibam because maybe it wasn't actually divorce. When Mar says it can't be that, but the safe is from the fact that the next clause in the Mishnah, that if she says Hareze get mehayom u'achar misa, then if you put both phrases in, then you do choletes, then you do chalitza. And we call the reisha that in the first clause, doesn't that imply that in the first clause, if she says if you imasi, then it's a divorce and it's nothing, and it will mean yevumi nami yevama, that he could also do yipam with her. The Gemara says, well, our Mishnah is like the Rabbanan. Whereas Rav Huna is not telling us, he's not interpreting the Mishnah, but he's giving us another position, the position of Rabbi Yossi, who says that even though he said this phrase, which is not valid, which seems to be like a get after death, Zmano shel shtar mochiach, the date on the get proves that it was really intended to be given prior to death, because there's a date on the get. So the Gemara says, well, Rabbi Yossi, chalitza nami lo tibai. Well, it's Rabbi Yossi. If you want to say it's like Rabbi Yossi, then Rav Huna is like Rabbi Yossi, and then it's actual get, then she shouldn't also require chalitza. She should be allowed to marry anyone right away because she was divorced. If you want to say Rav Huna himself wasn't sure if the law was like Rabbi Yossi, in which case she would not require a get, or she would not require chalitza because she's divorced, or it's not like Rabbi Yossi, in which case she could really do yibum. And you want to say he wasn't sure, so he requires chalitza. We know that Rav Huna was not uncertain because while Rabbi Bar Afuah, there was once an incident. Chala, she got sick. Olagabe Rav Huna Rav Nachman. So Rav Huna Rav Nachman went to visit him, and said Rav Huna to Rav Nachman, "By me name Rabbi Bar Afuah." So while Rabbi Bar Afuah is sick, ask him, "Halacha like Rabbi Yossi or ein halacha? Is the law like Rabbi Yossi that if you put the date on the get, it's as though she was divorced from that moment and not a get after death?" So I find out what is the halacha under those circumstances. So the Gemara says, ask him that question. And Rabbi Bar Afuah said, So Rav Nachman responded to Rav Huna, I don't even understand Rabbi Yossi's logic. You want me to ask him what the halacha is? Do you see from here that before you try to find out the question, understand the logic? So he says, so Rav Huna responds to Rav Nachman, you ask him if the law is like Rabbi Yossi, that the date proves that it was a get, and ana aminocha, the time of Rabbi Yossi ana aminocha, and I'll explain to you the logic. So by minei, so Rav Nachman asked Rabbi Bar Afuah, is the law like Rabbi Yossi or not? And so he said, Amalei hachli amarav, halacha like Rabbi Yossi. The law is like Rabbi Yossi, that if he says that if you put the date on the get, even though he's saying meti mechol izeh, that she's going to be divorced. So the Gemara says, the law is like Rabbi Yossi, so So after Rav Nachman left, then Rav Huna said to Rav Nachman, Talmid Rabbi Yossi, Hainu Talmid Rabbi Yossi. This is the explanation for Rabbi Yossi, because Savar's Manashal Star Mochiachov. He proves that the date proves that the fact that there's a date on the get means that they were divorced from that moment. From the moment he says you're divorced from today, if I die, that means, but since there's a date, it means she was divorced from today. So if that's the case, if she was really divorced, why does Rav Huna require chalitza? We see Rav Huna was not uncertain about the time of the date of the get. He knows it's the laws like Rabbi Yossi, who says it's a get. So the Gemara says, yeah, he rules like Rabbi Yossi that if there's a date on the get and she's divorced from today, even though he says in Meti Mecholizah, but Mesafkele, we're on the top of 72b, but Rav Huna himself had a question, I Amar Rabbi Yossi Balpeh Ilo Amar. If Rabbi Yossi would still say she was divorced if this statement was only said orally. So what's this case here? Rashi explains on the top of 72b. Kigon gabe get shekasav kelchaso. Let's say you have a get that was written properly. Ukishemosrala, when he gives it over to her, Omer, he says to her, Zagi teich and meiti. This is your get if I die. So the get was written properly, but then when he hands it over, he says that. It's not similar at all to the contract. Because maybe Rabbi Yossi only says his law in a case where this stipulation, if I die, is written next to the date. Then the date proves that you weren't intending to divorce her from today. But if he just says it orally, Dilma kimasr nile hadarbe mizman dishtari. Maybe when he gives it over to her, he's recanting the date on the contract. And he's giving it to her on the condition that she dies, on the condition that it comes after the death. Since he didn't say from today. So what if he just adds this statement orally after the get is written? That's what we're not sure what Rabbi Yossi would say. So the Gemara says, but really, is Rav Huna really unsure in that case? Is Rav Huna really unsure in that case? But Tanan, let's say, man, we learned in the Mishnah in Ksubos, the first half in Ksubos, he says, and we're going to learn this also on 76b. If a man says, this is your get, if I don't come from now until 12 months, this is your get if I don't come from now until 12 months, and then he dies within those 12 months, get. Then it's not going to be considered a get, because it's not going to be considered a get until 12 months. And so therefore it's a get after death. Vitani Allah, and we learned about that. The rabbi said no, that she's actually allowed to marry right away. Meaning to say, we view this as a get under these circumstances, that the rabbis allowed her to remarry right away. Uman Rabosenu, and who are these rabbis? I'm Rabbi Yehuda Marshmal, Beidina de Sharon Mishcha. This is the Bezdin that allowed the oil of the idolaters. This is in Mesechas Avodah Zarah, that they said it's too strict to say that the oil of the idolaters will be prohibited. This refers to the case that these were the halachos that they said in the attic of Hananiah ben Chizkiah ben Geron, and they went up to his attic, and Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel took a vote, and that day they declared 18 things, and 5 of those 18 were decrees that were made to distance themselves from the nation, like the you're not eat the bread of the nations, or their oil, or their wine, and aside from these decrees, the rabbis added on other things. And so therefore, some became so lenient. What was the purpose of these decrees? That you shouldn't go out to dine with the nations of the world, so perhaps you will be converted, or else it could cause you to become eat non-kosher food. But anyway, we see from here that the prohibition of eating the oil of using the oil of the idolaters was too much. And so there was a court that came along and overturned that decree. And who was this court that overturned it? That was Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and his Bezdin. And what's the reason why they overturned it? Savilek Rabbi Yossi de Amar Zmano Shel Shtar Mochiach Olav. And who is this court that overturned it? That was the court of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. And what's the reason that they allowed this, under this case, this woman to remarry? Because they say it's because there's a date there that since there's a date in the get, or since then it proves that even though he said this statement in Mulbati Mikama Yud Beis Chodesh, the date in the get meant that she was divorced right away. And so we see from here that Rabbi Yossi and his Bezdin allowed her to remarry right away because it's mano shall get mochiach. So we see from here. So we see from here that Rav Huna shouldn't have been a doubt whether or not, because the Rav Huna should not have been a doubt about this. So hold on one second. So it's an open Mishnah that this court, that the Rabboseinu allowed her to remarry because they are clearly of the position that they rule like Rabbi Yossi, that Zmano Shel Shtar Mochiach, even in the case where it's oral. So Rav Huna was saying, yeah, but it wasn't clear in that case that it was oral. Misafkaway, so no, Rav Huna wasn't certain if when we say that the rule is like Rav Yossi, that the date of the get proves that it was intended to be divorced from that day and not after death. He wasn't sure if that applies even in a situation where it's an oral stipulation after the fact. Really? The Gemara says, is that really the case? So, but Rava said, if a person says, this is your get if I die, and also this is your get shani met, which implies that he wants to divorce her right away because of with the stipulation that he's about to die. Under these circumstances, hareze get, it will be a get. Kisha amos, but if he says, when I die, or after death, ain't a get, then it's not a get, because it's after death. And what's the stipulation of the first case? Why does Rava say it's a get? If you want to say he's saying from today you're divorced if I die, the Rabbanan, and it follows the position of the Rabbanan, who say that if he says specifically from today it's a get, do you really need to say this? It's explicitly our Mishnah. If from today, if I die, then it's a get. It must be that he didn't say you're divorced from today, and it must be following the position of Rabbi Yossi, who says that as long as there's a date, even though he didn't say from today, it's still a valid divorce. And this is a case of an oral stipulation with a date. It's clear from here that Rava is saying the law is like Rabbi Yossi. So the Gemara says, but Rava pshitale. Yeah, to Rava it was obvious that the law is like Rabbi Yossi, even in an oral stipulation. But Rav Huna Mesafkle, Rav Huna himself was uncertain about that ruling, and that's why he requires chalitza according to Rabbi Yossi. B'bayis ema, or alternatively, in this case, olam de amar la me'ayom. Now, Rav is talking about a case where he did say from today, and so why does he need to say it? The Rabbanon, and it follows the position of the Rabbanon who say it's again in that case where he says from today. So why does he need to say all this? Because it's a teacher shani meis came meisi dami. Because the expression shani meis is not in our Mishnah, and he's teaching us that the expression shani meis is like the expression in our Mishnah came meisi dami, that if you say me'ayom, it's a valid divorce. Kesha amos, but if it says when I die, that's kol achar meisa dami, and that's what the Bryce is teaching us. Yeah, it's obvious the laws like the rabbis, but it's telling us the laws like the rabbis in this case. And then the Gemara says, and some want to say that this teaching of Rav Huna, who says that she requires chalitza, is that she requires chalitza in that case, is not said on the first clause where he says, me'ayom, that you're divorced from today if I die, but it's rather going on the latter clause. where he says Zegitecha achar misa, where if he says this is your get after I die, he has said nothing. Well, Amar Kum, but still Rav Huna comes along and says, Amar Rav Huna, Divrei Rabbi Yossi, according to Rabbi Yossi, even if he says this is your get when I die, still choletzes. This is, even if he says this is your get after death, Rabbi Yossi would still require chalitza. Gemara says, well, isn't that obvious? So the Gemara says, Pshita, it's obvious. And according to Rabbi Yossi, under those circumstances where he says this, that she would require chalitza, midasefo rabbanan chaletzes, just like the rabbanan require chalitza in the circumstance of the latter clause, where we're not sure, he says me'ayomu achar misa, where he says that ambiguous clause, the rabbanan require chalitza, reisha nami Rabbi Yossi chaletzes, and certainly in this case where he says this is your get after I die, that Rabbi Yossi would also require chalitza in that case. So the Gemara says, no, Mao Dutema, you might have said Rabbi Yossi Baha Rabbi Sfirle. Tamar Gita Mahal Yahavi, that Rabbi Yossi in this case holds like Rabbi, who says in the case from today, after I die, it's an actual valid get. The chalitza nami loti bayim. Rabbi, the third position, says you don't even need chalitza in that case. So we see from here, Kamash Milan. So Rav Huna is telling us the low Rabbi Savarach Rabbi Yossi. That Rabbi doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi, who says that the date on the get proves that it's a valid get from that day. The low Rabbi Yossi Savarach Rabbi, and Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold like Rabbi, who says that Me'ayom Achar Misa, you don't require chalitza even. So the Gemara says, Rabbi lo savar like Rabbi Yossi. We know that Rabbi doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi. We know that. I don't know that Rabbi doesn't hold like Rabbi Yossi. The Katani Kazaget, because it states in the Brisa, like this circumstance, it is a get. Kazaget. U'miyute de Rabbi Yossi. And that's to exclude the position of Rabbi Yossi, who says that even if he didn't say from today, it's a valid get because of the date of the shtar. So Rabbi says only if he says me'ayom is it a get. Rabbi Yossi lo savarah Rabbi, but Rabbi Yossi does not follow Rabbi's position. The Katani kazeh get u'miyute de Rabbi, because he's saying only if there is. So Rabbi Yossi says because it says kazeh get. Because from the fact that Rabbi Yossi says in the Brisa, like this, it's a get, meaning to say to exclude the position of Rabbi. Because Rabbi says me'ayom la'achar misa is a condition and it's a get, but he's going to say like the Rabbanan, who says that it's a suffix and therefore does chalitza. So now the Gemara says, let's see this Brisa that Rabbi's talking about. What's the Brisa of Rabbi? Rabbi Mahi de Tanya. Rabbi says, "Me'ayomu acharmi," so that if a person says from today and then after death, get ve'eno get. That's the position of the Chachamim. The Chachamim says she would require chalitza. Rabbi says kadzeh get. She doesn't even require chalitza because she says me'ayom, because he said me'ayom. Whereas Rabbi Yossi, Mahi, what's the position of Rabbi Yossi? Where do we see the position of Rabbi Yossi? Ditnan. We're about to learn the Mishnah on Ayin Vav, where we learn Kisvu Utenu Get Ishti, and Muabati Mikan La'av Yud Beis Chodesh. He says, write and give a get to my wife if I don't come from now until 12 months. Kasvu Betoch Yud Beis Chodesh, V'nasnu La'achar Yud Beis Chodesh, you get. That's it, you wrote it within the 12 months, and you gave it after the 12 months, it's not a get, because according to the Rabbanon, it's not a get, because he said, write the get, and give it after the 12 months. And so therefore, if he died within 12 months, it's not a get. Whereas Rabbi Yossi says, kazeh get. Rabbi says, since the husband said, write and give it before he said, if I don't come, it implies that his intent was to write it now and give it to her after 12 months if I don't come, which means to say that she was divorced from right now. However, in a circumstance where he would say the reverse, if I don't come from now until 12 months, write and then give it, and then he wrote the get within 12 months, there Rabbi Yossi would admit that it's not a get, because here his intent is that the writing should take place after the 12 months, like the giving. So now the next clause is, it said in our Mishnah, and then he got up and he walked in the marketplace. So under those circumstances, and then he got sick and died, we evaluate him. If he died from this first illness, then it's a get. Otherwise, not a get. Amar Rav Huna, Gito kimatanato. Rav Huna says the get is like a gift. Ma matanaso, just like if he gives a gift while he's dying, but it's called a deathbed gift. Im Amar Choser, that if he wakes up and stands up, then the gift is recanted. Af Gito im Amar Choser. So to his get, if he gives a get while he's dying, then we're going to say, if he gives a get because he thinks he's dying, he wants to save her. If he gets better, then the get is canceled. And just like a get, even though he doesn't specifically say give it, it says write it, even though he didn't say give it, it's a valid get. So to his gift, also by a gift, since he says give it, even though he didn't actually give it to the person, since there was no transaction. And Tanan, so the Gemara challenges Rav Huna, who says a get is like a gift. So the Gemara says, so it says in our Mishnah, this is your get from today if I die from this illness. But you see, if he died from the first illness, he's a get, otherwise not a get. And if you want to say Rav Huna, that if a person who's very sick gives a get, and if he's healed, then Choser, then under those circumstances, the get is canceled. Why do we need to evaluate him? He stood up from his illness. So I'm a Rav Yosef, which made the Rabbah. No, he went from one illness to another illness, and so that's a circumstance. He was a different illness. The Gemara says Amad Katani, but it said he got up. So the Gemara says Amad Mikol is having enough. Yeah, he got up from this illness, but he went to a different illness. The Gemara says Vahalach B'Shukatani. It says he walked in the marketplace. No, Halach Hamashanto. He walked on his staff. The Gemara says Vakamashval and the Halach Hamashanto Hu Debainan Umdina, and that's what it's teaching us. That if you walk on your staff, you require a evaluation. But if somebody didn't walk on a staff, umdana nami lo ba'inan, he doesn't need an evaluation. And if he died from the first illness, we're going to assume that he even though he switched to another illness, he still has the first illness under him. So Masmina, we learn from here, and if a shlimera goes from one illness to another illness, his gift is a gift. So the Gemara says, yeah, that's exactly what we learned. If the shlimera goes from one illness to another illness, we'll view it as one long illness. So we'll stop here, and that's a very appropriate phrase to say as we go into Tisha B'Av, because sometimes in Jewish history, do we look at these multiple different persecutions or as one long persecution? And we see from here, it's one long persecution.